The next morning, the sun rose just as it always did, casting its golden light over the compound. But for Amani, everything had changed. As they served breakfast to the men, Amani's hands trembled slightly. She could barely look at their faces, knowing the cruelty they were capable of. The image of the children being led to the van haunted her. Naomi shot her a glance, one that seemed to say, "Stay calm, don't give anything away." Amani forced herself to stay normal and focus at the task at hand. "Remember," Naomi whispered when they were finally alone for a brief moment in the kitchen, "we must act like nothing has changed. Keep your head down, don't ask questions, the walls here have ears, you know." Amani nodded, agreeing that Naomi was right, and so she remained normal during the chores. As she lay on her bed that night, Amani made a silent promise to herself she'll find a way to escape for her daughter's sake and her own. Amani's fear reached a breaking point the next day when she was called to Pastor Adonijah's private chambers. Her heart raced as she made her way through the winding corridors past the guards and great sisters who watched her every move. As she entered the dimly lit room, she found Pastor Adonijah sitting, his hands clasped together. The room smelled of incense and the atmosphere was suffocating. Pastor Adonijah smiled, but there was something unsettling in his expression, as if he already knew what she was hiding. "Amani," he said in a deep, calm voice, "come and sit here with me." Amani did as instructed, lowering herself into the chair opposite him. Her pulse quickened as she fought to keep her face neutral. He leaned forward slightly, his eyes looking onto hers. "I've been watching you closely, Amani," he began, his voice smooth. "You've become quite an important figure here. You've been loyal, you've shown loyalty and devotion, but I must ask you, are you happy here?" Amani's throat went dry. She forced a smile and nodded slightly, but her mind was racing. What was he trying to get at? Did he know about what she had seen that night? Did he suspect that she has been planning her escape for weeks? Pastor Adonijah's gaze did not stop. "Are you comfortable here, Amani? Or have you been thinking of leaving us?" Her blood turned cold. Amani knew that this was a trap. No one ever left the compound. Those who tried were never seen again. To admit that she wanted to leave will be signing her own death warrant. She stammered, her mind desperately searching for the right words. "I am grateful for everything, Pastor. You've given me and my daughter a place of safety, a community. We found peace here." He watched her closely, his expression unreadable. "And yet, something seems to trouble you. You know, Amani, we are family here. If you ever wanted to leave, I would understand." Amani felt as though the walls were closing in on her. She had to convince him she was still loyal, even as every fiber of her being screamed to run. "I am not going anywhere, Pastor," she finally managed, her voice steadying. "This is my home now." Pastor Adonijah smiled and said, "Good, very good. I knew you were one of the faithful." But as Amani left the room, the cold sweat on her back told her one thing: time was running out. As Amani struggled with her growing fear, she noticed a man who seemed different from the others. He was quiet and observant and often kept to himself. His name was Brother Daniel. One day, as Amani was cleaning near the men's trailer, Daniel approached her. "I know what you're thinking, Amani. I have been observing you. You are smart and you're right. This place is dangerous, but you have to be careful. Pastor Adonijah has eyes everywhere." Amani was startled but listened intently. Brother Daniel revealed that he was an undercover police officer sent to investigate the cult. He had been here for months, gathering evidence to bring Pastor Adonijah to justice. But the situation was delicate. "We can't just storm in," Daniel explained. "If we do, people will die. The pastor has conditioned them to believe that the government is the enemy. If they think they are being attacked, they'll prepare the final meal." Amani's heart sank as she remembered the teachings about the final meal, a ritual where everyone would eat poisoned food and go to the Lord together if they were threatened. She knew that Waridi and the other children would be forced to partake, and the thought terrified her. "We need to find a way soon, Amani, or people will continue dying," Daniel said. Weeks turned into months, and still Amani had not found a way out. She knew that survival requires strategy. Amani noticed that the great sisters were fiercely loyal to Pastor Adonijah, constantly on the lookout for anyone who might pose a threat to him. Amani decided to use this to her advantage. One day, Amani overheard a young woman named Esther whispering to another woman about a possible escape plan. Amani knew that this information could be her ticket to gaining the great sister's trust. She discreetly reported Esther's plan to Great Sister Sarah, faking her concern to the safety of the community. Great Sister Sarah, impressed by Amani's loyalty, rewarded her by promoting her to a higher position among the women. She was now granted access to parts of the compound that were previously off limits. One of these areas was the maternity ward, a dark, disturbing place hidden deep within the compound. Amani was horrified to discover that it was filled with hundreds of pregnant women, all of whom had been impregnated by Pastor Adonijah. The pastor had convinced these women that they were possessed by demons and that the only way to cleanse their soul was through intimate rituals with him. Pastor Adonijah claimed that his holy seed would drive all the evil spirits and that the resulting pregnancy were divine blessings, a gift from God. Many of these women were brainwashed into believing this, while others, too afraid to resist, complied out of fear of their lives. Amani estimated that there were at least 1,000 women in various stages of pregnancy, all confined in the ward. The great sisters were responsible for caring for them, ensuring that they remained obedient and did not attempt to escape. Despite her outward appearance of loyalty, Amani was horrified by what she had become a part of. She knew she had to do something to stop Pastor Adonijah. And because Great Sister Sarah knew that Amani was loyal, she had already shown her where the poison for the final meal was and instructed her on what to do when the government police showed up at their compound. And so, one day, when the other women and great sisters were serving breakfast, Amani sneaked into the kitchen and substituted the poison for the final meal with a strong sleeping medicine that she had managed to acquire from Daniel, the undercover police officer she had come to trust. After that, she returned the bottle in the drawers and went back to serving breakfast without anyone noticing what she had done. The next day started like any other day. Amani had been in the kitchen pretending to cook while her heart raced with the knowledge of what she had done. Suddenly, the sound of hurried footsteps echoed through the compound. One of the guards burst into the women's dormitory, his face pale with panic. His voice was breathless as he shouted, "The police! They are coming! The enemy government is here with them. They have vehicles, many vehicles." The compound erupted into chaos. The alarm blared across the grounds, a siren that Amani had only heard once before, signaling the dreaded moment Pastor Adonijah had been preparing for. Women, men, and children began to move in a frantic, rehearsed manner. The great sisters rushed to the kitchen, their eyes wild with fear, yelling for everyone to get ready for the final meal, their escape to the Lord. "Brothers and sisters, my children, gather now," boomed Pastor Adonijah's voice over the speakers. "It is time. The government has come to destroy us, but we will not let them take our souls. Prepare to feast with the Lord. We will leave this world on our terms." Amani's blood turned cold as she heard the announcement. She watched the great sisters begin to serve the meal, a collective sense of urgency in the compound. Her heart pounded as the women, men and children lined up to take their portions. Amani saw Pastor Adonijah standing on a platform at the front, his face serene, as if ready to ascend to a higher place. The great sisters distributed the food, their hands shaking, but they had no idea that the meal they were serving wasn't laced with poison. "Eat now, my children," Pastor Adonijah called out. "Let us be free from the evil government." Amani watched as the first few men, women and children began to eat. The tension in the air was thick, but soon, one by one, their bodies started to slump. It was happening. The sleeping medicine was working. The people who had taken the first bites slowly collapsed onto the ground as if they were simply lying down to sleep. The guards began to panic. "What is happening?" one of them shouted. "This isn't how it's supposed to be." Amani kept her head low, knowing she couldn't give herself away. She moved quietly through the crowd, her eyes scanning the scene. People were falling asleep all around her, and soon even the great sisters who had eaten as well started to drop. Pastor Adonijah stood frozen on the platform, confusion clouding his face. He had not eaten yet, still waiting for the moment of his so-called glory. His voice was sharp as he barked orders to the guards. "Get the men, get the children, get the women. Why are the ones who have taken the final meal falling asleep?" It was then that the sound of approaching sirens filled the air. The government vehicles, police cars, trucks and helicopters were drawing closer, and now there was nothing that Pastor Adonijah could do. The guards tried to shoot the police, but their guns had no bullets since Brother Daniel had secretly removed bullets from all the guns. The compound gates burst open and armed police officers spilled out, weapons drawn. Amani's breath caught in her throat as she saw Brother Daniel, the undercover officer, approach Pastor Adonijah. Pastor Adonijah tried to bolt, but the officer grabbed him by the arm, pulling him down from the platform. "It's over, Adonijah," Daniel said, his voice cold. "You are under arrest, you criminal." Pastor Adonijah thrashed and spat, but it was no use. The guards who were trying to fight the police were also arrested. Amani and the few people who had not taken the final meal watched as Pastor Adonijah, the man who had claimed to be a savior, was dragged away in handcuffs. The people and the children who had taken the final meal remained in deep sleep, unaware of the chaos around them. The 1,000 pregnant women were taken to safety, and efforts were made to help them recover from the trauma they had experienced. Amani went to where Waridi was sleeping on the ground together with other children. Amani scooped Waridi, who was in deep sleep, into her arms, holding her tightly as if she would never let them go again. In the days that followed, the full story of Pastor Adonijah's cult began to unravel. The compound was sealed off as a crime scene, and the authorities started to piece together the horrors that had taken place there. Dozens of women and men were interviewed, revealing the extent of the manipulation and abuse they had suffered under Pastor Adonijah's rules. The women, who had been taken to the punishment trailer, told stories of torture, humiliation, and psychological torments. Amani listened in horror as they recounted their experiences, realizing that she had come dangerously close to suffering the same fates. The graves where the women had been buried alive were uncovered, and the children who had been sold as sex slaves were returned back to their families, and the people involved in this crime were arrested as well. The news spread quickly, and the nation was shocked by the revelations. The government vowed to bring Pastor Adonijah and his accomplices to justice, but for Amani, the real battle was just beginning. The survivors were offered counseling and support as they tried to rebuild their lives. Amani and her daughter were taken to a safe house where they were provided with food, shelter, and emotional care. The day of Pastor Adonijah's trial came, and everyone was curious to see how it would go about. The trial of Pastor Adonijah and his followers was a media sensation. The courtroom was packed with journalists, survivors, and the families of those who had been lost. The survivors, including Amani, testified, recounting their experiences in the sanctuary with strength. Pastor Adonijah sat silently throughout the trial, his once mesmerizing voice now powerless. The verdict was swift and unanimous. Pastor Adonijah and his closest followers, including Brother Joshua and Brother Gideon, were found guilty of multiple counts of murder, kidnapping, and abuse. Evidence was also presented that Pastor Adonijah was a drug dealer who sold drugs in the church, as no one will suspect him. Pastor Adonijah and his closest followers were also found guilty of child trafficking and stealing money. They were sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. For Amani, the verdict brought a sense of closure. Justice had been served, and the man who had caused her so much pain will never hurt anyone again. But the scars of the past will take time to heal, and Amani knew that the journey ahead would not be easy. Weeks after the trial, Amani and her daughter were relocated to a new town, far away from the horrors of the sanctuary. Amani found a job at a local school, and Waridi was enrolled in kindergarten. She and Waridi found happiness in their new town, and Amani became involved in a support group for survivors of cults, sharing her stories and helping others who had gone through similar experiences. Waridi thrived in her new school, growing into a bright and happy child. Daniel remained a constant presence in Amani's life, and their friendship blossomed into something deeper, and eventually they decided to build a life together. Amani watched her daughter with pride, grateful for the second chance they had been given. The horrors of the past will always be a part of their story, but Amani was determined to write a new chapter, one filled with hope and healing. This story shows us how religious leaders can manipulate and exploit vulnerable people, turning their faith into a tool for control and deceit. Even in the Bible, in Matthew 7 verse 15 to 16, we are warned. The verse says, "Watch out for false prophets. They come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly they are ferocious wolves. By their fruit, you will recognize them." Christians, it is important for you to have discernment when choosing spiritual leaders. Anyway, that was it for today's story. I really hope you enjoyed it. I hope to see you in my next video. Kwaheri.